What's up guys, and in today's video I'm going to be going through how I'm shifting discipline through obsession over motivation, why this is important and how I'm actively thinking about this, and also how it has transformed me over the past 61 days. So like always with these videos, the main mission is to show our builds raw and real, to show you the good, the bad, the ugly, what it is that I'm actively implementing in terms of mental models, where we're failing and also where we're succeeding, and also just to use that as a platform to build better products and just build cool things as well. And also just to solve what hurts within businesses and organizations, to come in and to ultimately be the chief problem solvers and ultimately build back in infrastructure while doing it. And also just to call in visionaries, basically people aligned with the mission of what it is that we're actively striving to solve for, and also just to build a network of cool people doing cool things at the same time. So 61 days in, still here, still building, still showing up. And the truth is, I'm not here because I'm motivated, because I think motivation is, one of those things that comes and goes, just sheer motivation and having that. I think one of the worst things that I could possibly done in terms of mental framing going into this would be just saying, hey, like I need to be motivated enough to just, do it, because motivation comes in sprints sometimes and it just comes and goes, but motivation is simply just not enough. And I asked myself, so how can I actively, what was the framing? How can I shift my identity in terms of, just doing these daily videos? And now we're 61 days in. I think, if I was motivated, we could have, just easily crushed, during the most difficult days, which were day 50 to day 50 to day 51, 52, around then. And ultimately saying, hey, like those days I was not motivated. I had flu, I had so many things going on at the moment at that time, and I was like, hey, like if I was solely relying on motivation, I don't think I would have, just continued. And that's one of the most important things that I had to shift within myself, to basically just shift the identity of saying, hey, I don't want to be motivated going into these daily videos, because I think motivation comes and goes and it comes in sprints, and it often also does not come. So ultimately saying, hey, it's because I want to build a level of obsession that makes discipline feel automatic. Right now, I think one of the most important lessons, at least that I've learned from these daily videos, is ultimately just building that sheer discipline to say, hey, how disciplined can I be each and every single day to just keep hitting the nail in the wall and building these videos each and every single day, which I have done so far. 61 days, not so bad. I didn't, picture that we would get this far, but we have. And saying, hey, that version of me before did this, the version of me before did not think about it in this way. I just, I relied on emotion, to be honest with you, and energy, but that was not long lasting. You need to build those things within your own internal compass that ultimately allow you to then sustain it. And one of the things that, I think is very unsustainable, at least I found in my personal opinion, is just solely just relying on motivation and not discipline, because I think discipline just gets you through the times when you don't feel like doing it, because we're all gonna have those times where we don't feel like doing stuff. But hey, discipline is one of the most important lessons and learnings that I've had through that. And saying, hey, I would, my old version of myself, he'd show up when it felt good, and that version of me now is dead. So basically saying, hey, from now, how did I kill that version? Basically just through discipline, through a new level of intensity and obsession, and discipline as well. Because without that, I wouldn't, we wouldn't be 61 days in. And I think it's, something that I, probably unappreciated at the time, to say, hey, I'm basically just focusing on energy each and every single day, but that energy dies. And how can you actively, build this moat or this system within your internal compass that ultimately guides you through those tough times where you lacking motivation, you're not feeling well, and you just aren't yourself, basically just through discipline, at least I found. And just having that sheer obsession to say, hey, I'm going to be so obsessed with what I'm doing right now in terms of pushing out these daily videos, because that is going to weigh greater than having or relying on motivation each and every single day, which I think, is not sustainable in the long run. How can I actively just build these mental moats within myself that ultimately allow us to build the machine inside Killer Chaos OS, and also build the self? Because I think, in as much as, building the machine is important, I think building the self is as important. And this just comes through new levels of discipline, which I think, are going to be one of the top principles that I'm going to be, incorporating each and every single day or within my life, moving on. So we're just going to take it to higher and higher levels. I think I did a post on this on Twitter, just a sidetrack, where I mentioned yesterday, I was like, hey, how do I expect to solve big problems and do all these things that I say I'm going to do if I can't do 100 days? Like, if I can't do 100 days of daily videos, how do I expect to be the person that is, solving all these persons? And how does that version of myself look like? And ultimately, in order to get there, I know that I'm just gonna have to keep killing all versions of myself each and every single month, if we will, that ultimately do not serve the purpose, and just say, hey, each and every single time, how can I kill the old version of me that does not help me get to where we need to be? And ultimately just through sheer discipline, a new level of discipline. I think that is one of the most, intense things that has shifted within me through these daily videos, and that is something that will go unmatched and turn me into a better operator, which I am super pumped about and super excited to be building into the future. But yeah, but with that also, it takes an understanding of saying, hey, obsession is a system, not a feeling. So basically, how can you build the system through obsession, and how can you remove the feeling of it, of saying, hey, I need to constantly feel good, I need to constantly feel pumped to be building each and every single day, but just having that mindset of, hey, I'm sick, I build anyway. I'm, I'm not happy, or I'm not necessarily in the best shape. I just build anyway. No matter what condition it is, ultimately just building that mode of I build anyway through any challenge. And also just understanding that, hey, each and every single day, I just need to make sure that I'm just on the dial and I'm just pumping, because that obsession ultimately, comes down to a number of different things. Like right now, I'm super pumped, to be building. I think one of the core things about me is that I like to build, and I just want to, just hit the nail in the wall each and every single day and say, hey, each and every single day, I just want to build, and I just want to make sure that we're providing as much value as we possibly can. And how can I actively do that? Through these daily videos, even just building the moat or just building the machine, Killer Chaos OS, and also just having those conversations. So it basically just comes down to a number of different factors, but that would not be possible if I just solely relied on motivation. And I think obsession and discipline get you so much further than just solely just relying on motivation to get you through certain days. And at least that's what I found, because most people chase motivation, they just want to just watch, kind of gonna be bashing a little bit, I mean, watch those videos of saying, hey, like, you need to do XYZ and all these things. I personally don't do it. I don't personally watch those motivation videos to say, hey, those ones with the soundtrack and stuff like that. I don't watch that. I just build, and that's the number one thing that I think matters most, to just get those results. Ultimately, just how can we actively just build those results each and every single day, and saying, hey, motivation is fragile. Like, those videos only get you so far, but at the end of the day, you're not really doing anything. You can watch 20,000 videos about solely just on motivation, but those videos simply just don't get you there. And that's just my personal take on it, that in as much as like, you can watch those videos, I think discipline and obsession, solely just obsessing over what you're building each and every single day, I think is the number one mode that allows you to build this version and kill the old version of yourself that didn't serve you to get to this new level. Because you constantly gonna have to be killing the old version of yourself, at least from what I believe, in order to reach the next level. And with this, it's saying, hey, one bad day and it collapses, your motivation is super fragile. If you have a bad day, it ultimately collapses. But obsession is stable, at least in my opinion, because it's rooted in clarity. So obsession is rooted in clarity because you know what it is that you want out of this life, you know what you want to reach, and you ultimately just know that each and every single day you're striving towards a specific goal, and you're super bullish or intent on reaching that goal. And through that, you also just build repetition. So you basically say, hey, each and every single day I'm going to be doing XYZ, that ultimately builds the version of myself, or builds the machine that ultimately gets us there each and every single day. Because without that, it basically lets you run the machine, and also just builds the person that you need to become in order to reach the next level. And it runs when nothing else does. So ultimately understanding that when nothing else does run, it also just runs in the background. And with that, that's what I've learned throughout the 61 days. And with this, that consistency isn't a willpower, isn't about willpower. It's not about, just having sheer willpower, but it's about engineering your life so that your default is just solely just action. In as much as, like I just said now, just solely just relying on watching those videos for motivation, it ultimately just does not get the job done. And I think one of the most important things is just to, get the things that you need to do to get done, and ultimately just create this default or engineer this default within your personal life, so that your default is just solely just action. Like, how can you just build through action each and every single day? I think that is one of the most important things. But with that, it comes by having obsession as a system and not just a feeling. At least in my opinion, at least this is what I've at least learned throughout, just building these videos, and also just building the machine Killer Chaos OS as well, and saying, hey, how I'm making execution inevitable is also super important. So every part of my system now feeds into the machine, and I think this is one of the most important things that I want to just, just touch on and maybe just go a little bit deep on. But I think each and every single thing that, I do on a daily basis needs to fit or needs to feed into the machine in some way or the other. So basically, daily videos equals the story engine. Basically, we're building a story engine that is ultimately, just gonna build how we're gonna be building Killer Chaos OS, and also just gaining those insights as well. Deep work blocks equals production engine. So basically just building, which basically just allows me to then have these different, these different engines that I'm actively building at the same time, because without building the other ones, we're actively just not doing anything. And I think each and every single thing needs to fit into a quadrant of your life, and ultimately saying, hey, how can you focus on the story engine? How can you build the production engine through these specific modes? And also saying, hey, conversations equals data engine. So gathering that feedback, those data loops, ultimately just engineering the life or engineering the modes that you want to ultimately just make sure that, hey, each and every single thing feeds into one engine within your life. And how can you actively do that? So saying, hey, the daily videos are feeding into the story engine, the deep work blocks are feeding into the production engine, and the conversations are feeding into the data engine, because we're gathering feedback in terms of what it is that we're building and also what we're learning as well. And saying, hey, Notion and Airtable as well, infrastructure brain. So I think one of the most important things that we want to do is just ultimately just build the infrastructure. So in order to do that, we also need to build the infrastructure brain each and every single day. And by doing that, we need to make sure that we're just actively just building that infrastructure brain through knowledge, and having the infrastructure, just building the infrastructure to house that knowledge as well. And also just having the silence, which is the sharpening tool. I think in as much as, you want to create something new into this world, I think silence, like I've spoken about in the previous video, is ultimately just, creates that, that block that ultimately gets you to ultimately just understand that, hey, we need to come up with new ideas. This is how we see the world from first principles, and this is how we basically, using first principles and systems thinking. I like to think of, those two frame mental models intertwined in some way or the other, to say, hey, systems thinking and first principles is somewhat intertwined, because if you understand the system at its core, you ultimately understand all the variables that may come into play, and you can actively just, build use cases, or just basically build a moat for which you can, predict the variables that may come into play, because you simply just understand the system at its core. And ultimately understanding that, hey, I'm not just grinding. That is not the thing that I'm doing. I'm not just focusing on grinding. I'm looping, and every input fuels the next output, and that's obsession, that's structure. And I think structured obsession as well is also very important, to say, hey, I don't just want to be, grinding. How can I structure this obsession so that it's just solely just focused, and that we're actively building and pushing the needle each and every single day? In as much as we can do so many things on a day-to-day basis, I think just having that structured obsession also guides us, and also allows us to then focus on what really matters, and then scales into the future. But with that, you need to kill your old self again and again and again. And I think this is one of the most important things that I've learned recently. Each and every single day, I need to be able to, evolve I need to be able to evolve every 30 days, because I don't want to evolve slowly. I just want to shred skin each and every 30 days, which is something that, I just recently had pop up in my mind, where I was like, hey, like, how can I, just get things done? This came about, funny enough, it came about when I was watching a interview on Elon Musk, and then he was saying, how do you get things done, how do you get a year's work done in 6 months? Basically just work a lot, do a lot more, do 100 hours, and if everyone's doing 40, do 100 hours, but make sure that 100 hours is structured. And I was like, hey, if I take that same principle or take that same frame of thinking, how do I shorten, the version of myself that, is able to become this person that, reshapes industries and also inspires millions of people into the future, ultimately having to share it every 30 days, and just shortening the time span to say each and every single day, each and every single 30 days, I need to make sure that I'm shredding the old version of myself each and every single time, so that we're just evolving at a much quicker pace, which I know that into the future is only going to scale. But by asking the question of, by simply just asking this question of saying, hey, what part of me won't survive the next level, ultimately just allow me to then understand that, hey, this is what I actively need to just improve on and kill, and say, hey, this is what I need to kill, and I can actively improve in XYZ way and build into the future. And whatever the answer is, I ultimately eliminate it, because old habits, old priorities, old excuses, that's all just compounds. So how can you actively just kill those things? I think just ultimately just asking that question and changing your frame of thought ultimately just builds that, that mental moats that ultimately gets you to the next level and allows you to shred skin every 30 days. And every upgrade demands a sacrifice. So, and I'm okay with that. Each and every upgrade that I need demands a sacrifice. Are you sacrificing some comfort for that? I think so. And ultimately just being okay with that is also super important, at least from my personal belief. And asking the questions of how can I actively, just build the future, I need to make sure that I'm shredding each and every single time, that I'm growing into the person that is able to, build, the future of Killer Chaos OS internally and also externally. But this is where it is going next, which I think is going to be super important. I'm saying, hey, there's a 30-day challenge to increase volume plus clarity at the same time. How can I actively just improve the volume and clarity at the same time? Mapping emotional cycles in the build process so that I can own the patterns. So basically asking, how can I actively own these patterns by mapping out my emotional cycles and locking in cadence for team updates plus advisor reviews? So basically our Chaos Killer advisory board, if you will, just actively just, building that so that we can actively just loop in those feedback loops and ultimately understand where we're getting it wrong, where we're actively also getting it right as well. And using the weekly discipline audit, asking what broke, what drifted, and what tightened within my mental model or frame of thinking, and how can I actively just improve this? Because asking those simple questions, I think, unlocks a level of awareness that allows us to, shred the old version of myself and the old version of the team as well, and also allows us to get to the next level. But with this, it ultimately comes down to momentum comes and goes, obsession compounds. Each and every single day that we're obsessed with what it is that we're doing, that we want to be the best in the game, we're actively compounding that, and that's what builds the one-of-a-kind builder who doesn't stop. At least my personal opinion, that this is what's going to build the one-of-a-kind builder within myself and externally as well, that ultimately does not stop in every single aspect, that we just keep on going no matter what. And that's the kind that makes execution a default identity, because that is where the real leverage lies. I think the real leverage long term is ultimately just making action a default identity. I mean, it's always been, but I think just to a new degree, to ultimately, kick it up a notch, to say, hey, I've been, using this as an identity, but how can I 10x the what I've been doing before and just make it a default? If I think of something, what is the delay or the time between me actually doing it, or me thinking about it and actually doing it, and just reducing that each and every single time? I think that is gonna, just allow us to build a lot more, just be in the trenches a lot more, and actively just build the future, because we're gonna build the future. And how do we actively do that on a day-to-day basis? I think obsession, because it compounds, is one of the modes that we're actively just going to be using as well, that I'm also actively just gonna be, you know, super deep on, because I think, you know, why not obsession over motivation any single day, and having that obsession structured as well, because motivation comes and goes, but ultimately that obsession compounds. And this is just my personal take on it. I know we'll just improve in a lot of different aspects, and we'll just reshape how we're actively thinking, you know, about this into the future with these 30-day sprints, how we're actively mapping out these emotional controls, and how we're locking in cadence for team updates, as well as discipline audits, what broke, what drifted, and what tightened, actively just taking that mental log of all these things, and just building the future from that. So day 61, I'm super excited. We are somewhat halfway, slightly more than halfway, but I'm super excited. We've built so much cadence, and I just, you know, I'm just super pumped to be continuing building, you know, and making these videos each and every single day. So we'll definitely hit 100 in a month or so, but ultimately what's after that, you guys will just have to wait and see, because I have some fun things planned. But we'll cross that bridge when we pass 100, which is the ultimate goal right now. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, make sure to drop a comment. Follow me on X, LinkedIn, Instagram. Links are in the description as always, and I will see you guys in the next video.